Hi, I'm DJ Ware. On this episode of the CyberGizmo, I'm going to go back and take a look at Debian 10, but more specifically, Debian 10.2, right after this. So there's probably a lot of reasons why you might consider Debian or any of its derivatives, actually. I think probably the best place to start is, as always at the beginning. So this diagram, it's in the upper right-hand corner, is the copy left. And copy left has to do with how a developer releases free and open source software. Yeah, I know, we don't want to get into the debate between free and open source, but we always use those terms together. Copyright restricts the use of software or printed material. Copyleft grants access to the material. So copyleft was really something that was formulated by the GNU Foundation, and it was adopted by Debian. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So Debian was established by Ian Murdoch in August of 1993, just literally a year after Linus Torvalds released the Linux kernel, or at least it became available. But the first release of Debian was in September of 1993. And the first stable release wasn't until 1996, around June the 17th. It was called Buzz. And there was a number of point releases in between, but the first official stable release took 3 years. And Debian is one of the oldest, but it certainly is not the oldest. Some people say Slackware is. Actually, there was one even before Slackware. But Slackware definitely is the oldest existing release of Linux that I'm aware of. So Debian was the first to establish a contract between itself and its users and developers, and that was called the Debian Social Contract. I'll put links below. They have it. Debian has it prominently on their website. You can go and read it. They also provided the Debian free software guidelines, which basically entails what they will include, what they won't include into their release, and how and why they manage things the way they do. The current project lead for Debian is Sam Hartman as of 2020. And I've heard this before. Why would somebody call this Debian Buster? What a stupid name to use. And Debian releases their code names are named after characters in Toy Story. And there's some reasons for that. When the GNU Foundation dropped support, they originally supported the development of Debian. When they dropped support, the developers were looking for a home in order to keep in touch and make sure that they were staying in touch with each other. And they used some of the servers at Pixar because I think some of the users were Pixar employees. And so Toy Story was the reason why they chose the characters for that. So every release of Debian, starting with Buzz, for Buzz Lightyear, have used a character from Toy Story. So there you go. That's the reason for the strange release names that they use. There are several branches of Debian. The most popular one is stable. Stable is the current release, and it's designed to be just what it says, stable and well tested. It's generated from the testing branch. They periodically at some point before the release of the stable branch, the Debian developers will freeze the test branch so that no further changes can occur. They complete whatever testing they have to do in order to build up the stable release, and then they pull it from the testing branch, and that is what is incorporated with any major security or other things into a final release. Debian continues to do updates to the Debian stable if and only if there are security or usability issues in the code. Testing is the preview branch. That is continuous. If you're pulling the testing branch, you're on a rolling release, basically. And it's not going to be guaranteed to run. So it just hasn't been fully tested, so you may run into issues with it. It's generated from the unstable branch. The testing branch is generated from the unstable branch. Testing updates are continuous until the branch is frozen in preparation for a new stable release. Eventually, testing will roll into a stable version. I think the next one is probably a few years away. Also, there is the unstable branch. That is always codenamed Sid. If you remember Toy Story, Sid was the evil one. Packages in the unstable branch are not tested. They're just accepted in, and they're used to allow developers to get access to the latest kernel, the latest libraries, the latest packages in order to do whatever development work they need to accomplish. It is bleeding edge, and it's generally not, there isn't a full file for the unstable branch. It's usually just a very stripped down, lightweight ISO file with a minimal amount of things in it. When you want extra things, you have to pull those packages directly from the repositories in the unstable branch. So I guess what is Debian? Debian is kind of the source of many, many derivative Linux distributions. And the reason for that is their philosophy behind their development, which is to provide this freely without payment and without copyright restrictions to anyone who wants to take their base and turn it into a new distribution. Ubuntu, Linux Mint are two of the largest ones. There are many more, including Knoppix was also derived originally from Debian. So yeah, there's many, many different releases of Unix that base their support off of the Debian core. Debian has the distinction of having the widest support for hardware processing platforms, or CPUs, of any of the releases that I am aware of. That it supports AMD, ARM, ARM-EL, ARM-HF, i386, MIPS, MIPS64, PowerPC, the IBM S390 mainframe. It also offers source, and there are some multiple Arch distributions as well. Debian includes non-free software, which is a bothersome thing to some people, but that is consistent with their Debian social contract and also with the Debian free software guidelines. They purposely include non-free software because that is the basis of their philosophy. This philosophy that they have, by the way, become part of the open source initiative. If you go to the open source initiative website, you will see the Debian social and the Debian free software guidelines that have been made part of the open source initiative. Debian strives solely for stability and usability. So if some people think that's boring, and yeah, security is in there as well, because if you're closing holes and you're closing, if you're not changing up your interfaces, you're not switching out software or libraries, you can test for security and you can certify for security and be assured that if there are things that are found, and there always are, that Debian is going to have a patch to deal with that in the near future. And they are not shy. That is, again, part of their social contract. They do not hide anything. If there is a problem, Debian posts it. And if it's a security issue, they tell you about it. So, yeah, I've never seen an issue with Debian ever withholding anything. I remember a major release problem, a major security problem with OpenSSL that happened, I don't know, maybe a few years ago, where the basis of the key generation scheme for OpenSSL was flawed. And Debian spent an awful lot of time. There was something like 32 key pairs that they had to regen and then get into all of the distributions that they had released from that point forward, and the ones that they were still supporting in order for them to get the fix out there. And they spent a lot of time fixing that. So, yeah, a lot of the old veterans that have been around for a while really appreciates what the Debian development community does. So, boring, maybe, but there are times of blind panic. Debian releases their testing branch all the time. I mean, it is basically a continuous release. So if you're on that and you want the latest and greatest bleeding edge, and you don't mind crashing your machine or or your devices or your applications once in a while, go for it. The major release stable branch, I think they do those about every 2 years or so, give or take. Some take a little longer, some take a little less. Just depends on the testing cycle and what they've encountered. But yeah, about 2 years or so. Some of them have gone longer. I've seen some that have really taken a long time. But anyway, the security and usability patches are always in between. So, for instance, the latest release 10.2 just came out in November, and the original 10 release was way back in July. Yeah, so the release was originally in July, and then they just as of November released 10.2, which includes a lot of security patches, a lot of bug fixes that they have found. Some reviewers call this a boring release. I don't call anything boring because the Debian community puts an awful lot of work into these things. Debian also has a pretty wide support for display managers. The kernel is 4.19, and I've heard a lot of people cry and hew that it should be 5. If you're on my point is, if you're on the latest hardware, if you've got the latest Threadripper or you have the latest pieces of hardware, Debian is probably not for you. It is probably not a release that you're going to be very happy with, because the driver support and also the support for your processor won't be there. So unless there's a security issue that causes them to have to advance the kernel up, I don't think you'll ever see that. I have never seen a jump yet on a kernel version. So, but the other thing you need to consider is that there have been a number of people testing the 5.x kernels. Yeah, I know it goes all the way back to 4.16, but the kernel is slower in the 5.x than in 5.19, so I don't know why you'd be rushing ahead for that unless of course there's hardware support that you specifically need. Debian includes support for thousands of packages, but they do not have the same level of support that some of the other distributions have. And really, if you think about it, it's really more of an I'm not trying to be defensive, but if you think about it, the more packages to support, the more work it takes to bring them into the environment and to test them and thoroughly test them to be stable. You wonder that if you have a small development staffs with a lot of packages, how much testing are they really doing? Because, like I said, the more packages you have, the more libraries you have, and the more testing you have to accomplish. But it also supports UEFI secure boot, which is, I don't know of too many others that do that. So yet, I'm sure it's coming, but yet. Other distros drop support for other hardware. Well, they do that. Debian has been known to continue to support older hardware almost indefinitely. So, yeah, I mean, if you look in there, you still see support for MIPS. MIPS hasn't been around for almost 20 years. So, yeah, if you've got some older hardware that you're running on, Debian probably is for you because you'll find driver support for your machines. Now, yeah, there are some issues with Broadcom in Debian. Broadcom in Debian, just, I don't know what it is, but they do not support all of the things that Broadcom releases, and that affects, of course, your Wi-Fi and possibly your Bluetooth drivers. But you have to look at Debian as kind of Spartan. They look at things instead of making things flashy or shoddy. Debian really focuses on making things simple, plain. And then, the less tweaks you have, the less chance there is to inject an error. So I guess that's really what their philosophy is behind that. Keep things simple, as they used to say, KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. And that's kind of the philosophy behind Debian. Just keep it simple, keep it plain, keep it fast. The application store you're going to find in Debian is very thin. And there's a reason for that. Again, it takes time to bring all those in and to test them. Debian actually does a lot of testing. Some packages, some will say are probably out of date, and they probably are. But the point, I guess, back to the point, the original point is, what do you want? Do you want the latest, or do you want stable? You can't have both. It just doesn't work that way. And that's kind of consistent with being stable is consistent with their goals and objectives for Debian. So, so if you want stability or do you want the laytest? If you want the latest, Debian's not for you. If you want better security, Debian turns AppArmor on by default in Debian 10. So, that is a mandatory access control framework, and they also have support for SE Linux. If you want a really good administrative book on Linux, I'll put a link below. There is a free publication that you can get that is the original Debian book that has been, I don't know if it's been updated to the most current releases, but in there, they will take you, and if you're a beginner in Linux, that book is a good place to start because they will take you from the beginning of a brand new user to Linux, and they will step through every single thing that you can make Linux do, from how to harden it, how to put in a firewall, how to create users, how to put users in groups. What are those groups? What's in the file system? How to find things, how to file things. It is an excellent book. I'll put that link in below so that you can get a copy of it. They have a number of formats. It is free, or you can donate if you want to. The default is to donate, but there is a link on there to a free download for it. Also, rolling back to what I was talking about here on Debian 10, there is driverless printing, and that is an advantage if you're attaching IP printers or printers attached to the network, and that it will discover them and it will automatically configure the CUPS driver for you. The default display manager is GNOME Wayland. You can turn it back to Xorg, and you can also choose Mate or XFCE. There's a version of Cinnamon. There is support for LXDE and LXQT, as some of the others, and KDE Plasma is also supported in there. It's funny that if you look at some of the releases over time, if you go out and you look at the history, Debian has always supported GNOME as their primary display. That's never changed. And then there are other releases, say like Slackware, which have always supported KDE. So it's people wonder why they're still using GNOME is because they've always used GNOME. So let's do this. Let me switch over to full screen here, and we'll bring up boxes. I'm going to go do boxes today, and I'm going to use boxes because there's a thing in here I want to show you, a trick. So if you can install, if you don't have to download Debian to get an install up in boxes. They have an express install, but I would warn you that that's 10.1, not the latest. So I'm going to select a file, and I'm going to go to my downloads folder, and I'm going to choose Debian 10.2. And I'm still not out of the woods here, because if I were to this by default is on, the express install is on. If I leave that on, it's going to download 10.1. Well, I don't want that. So, I don't think this is really needed here. Let me just get this out of the way, because I'm going to use the normal installer, and then we'll just go ahead and continue. Also, you will need at least 2 gig of memory for Debian. I'm going to give it 4, but you'll need at least 2. And then 21 gig is probably enough. I always have a tendency to allocate a bit more, so I'm going to go up to 30. Close enough. I don't need anything else customized, so I'll go ahead and create it. And then I have my choice between, I can do a graphical, a text install, set advanced options. But let's do, or I can install with speech synthesis. Well, I mean, that's important if you have a problem with seeing. So let's go in here, and you probably have seen this kind of a menu before. Debian has always used a very similar graphical base installer for as long as I can remember. So it's asking me for my location. Then it's asking me for the type of keyboard, American English. It's going to go out and find additional components that it might need for my hardware, which is under a virtual machine, so shouldn't find too much. And it's configuring my hardware for IPv4, IPv6, probably DHCP coming up. Yep, there it is. Okay, that's fine. And this is one of the rare places, the rare distros where it actually asks you for a domain name, and all the others you have to go set it after the fact. So that's kind of nice. Now I'm gonna create mine without a root password. That what happens here is, if you leave the root if you put a root password in, it creates it does not allow sudo. So you would have to go automatically add the next user into your sudo account. If I leave this blank, then root is disabled, and the next login will automatically get sudo privileges. So give my full name. And I'm in the central time zone. It's going to piece together a bunch of stuff, and then it's going to ask me. Now, you can choose guided, and it'll give you some other choices here. For example, I can separate out the home partition, and then I can also do home var and temp. One of my complaints with all these guided is that they severely limit the root partition, which is fine if you're in a server environment, not so fine if you're using a display manager. So in this case, if I choose separate the home partition, it's going to put 10 gig approximately into root, and the rest of it's going to balance across the rest of the file systems. If I put this here, it's only going to give me about 7 gig for the root, which is really not enough. So I'm just going to go ahead and throw it into one partition, but just be advised of that. So in the 10.2 release, you may opt, if you want the partition, I would suggest always go manual and just do it that way. Okay, finish and write the changes to disk. Yes, it is what I really want. Well, it's not what I really want, but it's what I'm going to do. I'll be back because this is going to take a bit, and yeah, we'll pick this up. It'll be a few minutes for me, a few seconds for you. So it has stopped, and it is waiting for me to, if I was not on a net install, if I was doing the traditional means of a CD, or maybe I was using a DVD, which needed additional things, additional packages, then I would insert those into the computer. But since I'm using net install, I'm just going to continue. It's asking me for the package manager to configure. I'm in the US. That's fine. Debian.org. It's probably not fine to them, but I could put this closer to me, I suppose. Now it's configuring my package manager, and it should be getting ready to update the software that's out there. So it kind of takes the base image and then it's laying on the updates on top of it. So when I get all done, if I do an APT update, I shouldn't see anything new. But it's already done it here. Do I want to participate in sending statistics? Well, I'm going to opt out of this because this is under a VM, and that's not really a fair way to give them information. If I put this on a real machine, I probably would do that. Although I suppose they might want to know that. So I'm going to put GNOME. I'm going to turn off the print server. I don't need that. XFCE, I suppose I could put on, or KDE. Let's do KDE in addition. But you can see there was a pretty large selection of choices there. This will also take some time, so I will be back. Well, it didn't take as long as I thought. So at this point, I can choose between GDM3 or SDM. I'm going to go ahead and leave it on GDM3. SDDM, of course, is for KDE, but they will both work. And now it's installing. So I'll be back. I'm just trying to make sure that I show you the pieces in between. So it's just about done, and it's asking me now for the grub bootloader. The process takes, on my machine, on a 6700K, about 20 minutes to install with the way I had configured the number of packages that I wanted. So right now it's just asking me to put the master boot record on, and I'll give the device name the drive. There's only one there, so it will do that. This is fairly quick. This won't take very long. And then it sets up the user that I gave it. It goes in and sets up my time zone, and it's done. So at this point, it's going to finish up. It's going to reboot. And Debian, like Ubuntu, also is pretty smart about it. And it knows from the boot order that it wants to boot from the hard drive and not the CD-ROM. So there we go. Now at this point, I could leave it. This is Wayland. I could leave it. I could move it to the classic or the older version of GNOME. I could go to Plasma, or I could go to Xorg. So let's go ahead and do Xorg. That is still supported. And now it's going to set up my desktop for me in a very default, very vanilla fashion. So at this point, what I would normally do, as I always do, you'll notice it puts a pretty, it has a fairly good selection of games, I guess, that it puts here. That you might want or you might not want, but I'm going to add that to my favorites. The other thing I want to do is go back and go to settings, which is right there, because I want a little bit better display. And so we'll go ahead and set this to my usual 1490. It's asking if I want to keep it. Yep. And then I would go into the software stack. I might look for updates. There's nothing to be done. So like I said, the installer actually brings you to an up-to-date, so there's nothing to be done here. And then if I wanted to get rid of some of the games and stuff that I really won't want, or if I didn't want Evolution, I wanted maybe a different mail handler, a different calendar handler, I can do that. But probably the shocking thing would be when you come in here, you will not see quite as many packages as you would in other distributions. And there's about, I guess, 58,000 packages in total that you can install. So it's a pretty good selection, but just remember, they're not going to be the latest and greatest. And we've kind of talked about that. I might want to change the background. And there's quite a few to choose from. Plus, you can also, of course, use your own. I think that one right there, or maybe there's a better one. An older ones are down here in the previous release. That I think I'll take, and I'll leave the lock screen as that. I might also want to put Dasher. So let's do, that's in add-ons, input sources, and then wait a second here. Yeah, it should come up with them. I don't see it. Yeah, I don't see it. So I probably have to install that from the apt command line. But yeah, as far as the packages, you have the full LibreOffice. And yeah, it's kind of behind. I think 6.3 is the latest version. So yeah, it's a little bit behind. But again, you're trading stability for the latest. And this is the Firefox ESR release. And I think this, let's see what version it is. So that's the patched one that fixes a security release, I think 6.8-4. But again, it is not the latest version of Firefox. So I'll go ahead and close. Well, let's see. Let's see, what is the latest one? What did it say? I saw it there. 771.0. So, I mean, you can always install the latest packages if you want them, but you would have to do that yourself. As far as Debian is concerned, a couple things that I did want to go over with you is, let's go out to their site. If you want to read their social contract, it's right here. And this has been updated a little bit. But basically, you know, their belief is consistent with the GNU Foundation. So this has become kind of the template, even for Red Hat. And I remember when the Red Hat founder had read this, and he said, "We're going to adopt that, but it's probably going to be the nail in the coffin for Red Hat, in that this would limit our ability to make a profit." But Red Hat has found a way to make a profit through selling services. So, and I think Debian is, or excuse me, not Debian, but Ubuntu is kind of on the same track to offer the same kinds of things. And then the Free Software Guidelines, which is part of the open source initiative. And this talks about what is allowed and what the developer can do, or the owner of the software can do, to say, hey, I'm going to give this to you for free, but you have to agree you're never going to charge for it, or that you will fold back any changes that you make so that we all benefit from whatever additional enhancements you make. That has been a huge problem for corporations. Corporations do not like that. And in fact, the one I used to work for, they would review these software licenses specifically for that, because they had what they deemed as intellectual capital that was inside of their code, and they didn't want to share it, and yet they were willing to take the benefits of someone else's work. So that's not really in the spirit of free and open source software, is it? So yeah, corporations that are for profit, that are doing development for software, it certainly does not preclude them from offering, you know, something that could be charged, but it does say that you cannot charge for their software. I mean, if you want to modify it or enhance it, you can charge for your enhancements, but you cannot charge for their software. That is specifically prohibited and invalidates the license. So anyway, you know, I don't know what else to tell you about this. It is a very vanilla. I guess we should probably. I mean, as far as the file manager is concerned, that is just GNOME. It is a very vanilla install of GNOME. You'll find the same is true of XFCE. You'll find the same is true of Plasma, of KDE Plasma. Very stock. Now you can go in and tweak it. The tweaks are here, so you can go in and change whatever if you want this to be dark, or if you want to install some other theme, you can certainly do that. As far as what I normally would do on Ubuntu, you have to do this because you will find updates, and I don't think I will. But I'll test it, make sure. Yep, it's already up to date as far as the base install. Now, periodically you might want to run, to check to see if there are any fixes or any security fixes. But the thing I really wanted to share with you before I leave today is to talk a little bit about the Debian Handbook, because I think that is a great resource for people that are new. And so let me bring that up so you can see it. It is beautifully done. This was originally written in French, and then Debian had a crowdfunding campaign that raised about $27,000. They were just short of their $28,000 goal, and they translated this into a number of languages. Let me get this up to about 150 so you can actually see it. But maybe I should go a little bit higher. Yeah, let's go to 200 so you can see this a little easier on your video screen. But you'll notice it goes through and talks about what is it, what's the foundation, what's the inner workings of the project. There is the presenting the case study for why Debian is needed, and analyzing the setup. There's the basic installation. They go step by step, everything that went through that install, what you can do, the choices you can make and why you might want to make them. There's some information about the APT and DPKG. The APT is the Advanced Package Tool, and then the Debian Package Manager is how packages are put together and formed in order to allow you to install them, and along with their dependencies, of course. And then there's what happens if you've got a problem. Maybe there's a problem in the software. Maybe there's a problem in the documentation. Where do you go? How do you report it? There's some basic information about, I need a network. I want to set up accounts. I want to set up my printers. There's very detailed information in there. It talks about the Unix services. Now, one thing I will say is that Debian was the slowest to adopt systemd of all the distros. They dragged their feet until I think it was the last release where they actually started including systemd. And then it talks about the inetd. They talk about the networking infrastructure, virtual open VPNs, and IPsec. All of the PPT, the quality of service, how to do routing and domain name services. They just go on and on and on. So if you want a one-stop guide in all of the details on all of the advanced things or intermediary things for Linux, this is a great resource, and you'll find this link below. In the description field for this video. And if you get all the way down here into the appendixes, they give you, there's a basic course for beginners on everything you need to know to get started in Linux. It is just, I wish, I'm glad that they put this together. It is amazing. It is a great resource if you're a veteran and you're trying to find out something specific that you want to install, or you are this is your first foray into Linux and you want to understand more about how it works. A lot of the things they talk about here are distribution independent, except for when you get into specifics on package installation and configuration management for things like networking and LDAP and all those. Those are specific to Debian. So Just be aware of that. But that is a really good resource, and I would recommend that highly. So kind of, let me go back to the presentation here for just a minute. And I'll go ahead and bring that down, bring this back up so I can see where I'm at. Okay, so this is my personal thoughts on it. You know, the longer I use Linux, the more I like boring distros. I just, you know, sometimes it's really nice to be able to just switch on the computer and just have it just work without having to chase down. You know, there was an update, the package library got updated, and it blew up something in the other application spaces. I started seeing, you know, I don't see application crashes as often. Yeah, it does happen, but not as often in Debian. And it's nice to be able to have hardware device support for things that are older. You know, I've seen the case where I've been running along on an older piece of hardware on a different distro, and all of a sudden, the next release, the support for my device is gone. And Debian doesn't do that. Debian does not do that. They are pretty well known for holding on to those older device drivers, and that is handy. Now, on the same token, they are very slow about adopting new hardware because of the versions of the kernel they support. But that's the trade-off. What do you want? If you want latest and greatest, Debian's not for you. If you have new hardware, Debian's not for you. If you have hardware that is maybe 2 or 3 years old, yeah, maybe Debian is for you. And if you want to keep that hardware for 10 years, maybe you have a laptop. I mean, I've got a laptop that's probably close to 8 years old. I've got a base machine that's probably close to 13 years old, and both run. They still run Debian, still support it. So, and they run it quite well. I use Ubuntu for my servers, with the exception of my DNS server and my and some of the other security servers that I run. Those run Debian, and the reason for that is I don't want changes to occur unless there's security patches. So yeah, so you know, glitter and shiny objects have their place, and it's nice to be able to play with things that are brand new. But if you're looking for something that's tried and true and secure and tested and working, and you want to put it into production, a Debian or a Debian-based distro is a good choice, because they don't change that often, and you don't want change in production. Changing the application is one thing. Having the operating system change from out from under you can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars, particularly if you're in environments where you have to recertify when a new kernel comes out. So recertification can take years, literally take years, in order to be able to jump through all of the hoops to get that accomplished. And so, yeah, you don't want that to happen. I use Debian or Debian-based distros for everything, with the exception of the desktop that I'm running on here today, and I have good reasons for running Fedora, and I have run Fedora as a desktop for a long, long time. I will probably continue to do so, but and I will also continue to use Debian, particularly for the ARM-based machines. They just have the best support for it, so that's why I do what I do. So whether or not this is right for you, I would suggest go get the manual that I'm going to put in the link below, the handbook, and go look through it, see if it interests you. If it does, go install it. Kick the tires on it. You'll find it very zen, I guess, or very Spartan in the way it's approached to things. The Debian philosophy is to trade simplicity for glitter. And that usually translates to speed and performance. And so with that, I'm going to kind of leave things like this today. If there's something specific that you'd like to know about Debian, or something about its history, let me know in the comments below. And as always, please like and subscribe, and hope to see you all again very soon. And bye for now.